Hello and welcome to the Heretic Hammer podcast. I'm your host Marshall, and this is my co-host Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And today begins our truly heretical moment of having a Xenos double feature.
Ooh, 2-for-1 special.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, crazy. Not in one episode, but mind you, there'll just be 2 episodes in a row that are about Xenos.
Okay.
That's the real twist on that.
Yeah.
Our true actual double feature single episode is still to come, but will be coming. But today it is about the Eldar or the Aeldari. And specifically today, it'll be on the group called the Asuryani, or as we, in more of an English way of knowing him, would call them the Craftworld Aeldari. We will go over a little bit more than them too, but generally, this is the Craftworld Aeldari episode. So we did go over the main, just Aeldari basic history in episode 1. And we're not going to totally go over that again because we already did it. There's a whole episode with a whole large section about him in that episode. And honestly, episode 1 is kind of worth watching before you get here. We lead up all the way to how the Eldar get into becoming the big bad power of the galaxy, up until the fall, where they birth the Chaos God because of all their hedonistic values that they had devolved into.
Oh, those Eldar. Okay.
Yes. Although the Eldar we're talking about today are going to be the ones that they kind of realized, you know what? They're the ones that decided, okay, something is going on here. We need a dip. Whatever the fuck everyone's up with, we're not about. We need to go. We gotta leave. We're gonna hop on our Mayflowers and we're gonna go. Which were their craft worlds, which were these just continent-sized ships that led them out into the galaxy where they would kind of be able to go off and kind of bring their values back to where they should be, especially, the time near and after the war in heaven. Valuing art more, becoming better, putting themselves into aspects of warriors, stuff like that.
Were they specific about what went on the ships, or were they large enough that it was just everybody and everything could be taken with them?
Yeah, I mean there were a good number of these craft worlds that went out. So it was obviously generally centered around, just if you were in similar agreements to the concept, right? It was just like minds of, we're not down and into this whole, we're not into this degeneracy going on in our kingdom. Once the fall then happens, right? So the Eye of Terror explodes into existence. Slaanesh is born, and 90% of the Eldar race is just completely consumed and destroyed by chaos demons and Slaanesh. Right? So this obviously creates a distinct problem.
Yeah, no, I feel like a slight problem's putting it lightly, when you say 90% of your people race, just wiped out.
Yeah, it was not a good day. It's why this inevitably leads to the Aeldari kind of constantly putting themselves into a war against chaos, the great enemy, otherwise known as, and fighting against She Who Thirsts, and especially trying to destroy Slaanesh. You'll often see them wearing on their armor are these kind of oval gems. You'll see them, especially you should generally see them on somewhere near the chest, and these are called soul stones. And these will, when an Eldar gets like shot and dies, quote unquote, in battle, those soul stones will capture the Eldar soul, and then they can go back later because the Eldar are really good and tricky and are able to kind of come in and out of their webway portals fairly quickly. So if once they win or lose a battle, so if they lose, they'll run away, and if they win, they'll just do this right away, where they will go back around, find those who are dead, and try to get those soul stones back. And then by getting them, they can put them, there's essentially an engine inside of every craft world called the Infinity Circuit. And in that Infinity Circuit are the souls of all the Eldar who have perished and lost their corporeal form and are allowed the essentially peace to have effectively a form of an afterlife within the craft world without immediately going and being tortured forever by Slaanesh.
If the soul stone isn't found or isn't able to be recovered, what happens to the soul inside of it? Does it just stay there forever?
Yes. So if the stone itself is not destroyed in any way, which is inevitably somewhat tough, they will just end up kind of being hung around there. And the reason I say it's tough that they don't is because it's kind of easy because of the attuneness to the Eldar for them whenever they can go back to this battlefield to eventually kind of go and find their way. If they know that soulstone is intact, they kind of are going to at some point in the near future be able to find them. They effectively have their own psychic GPS to a lot of, especially their own family souls.
Oh, okay.
But that's kind of the other half of that is it's very rare that they would just end up sitting there because, if they say fight a Necron, well, the Necron will vaporize them and that soulstone is going to be vaporized along with it. And a lot of times, like even orcs or especially humans who especially know about Eldar will often, take them and completely destroy and dispose of, their remains. They're not always often just kind of left around unless it's some type of extenuating circumstance. But then again, that's when that allows the opening for the other Eldar to then come in and retrieve them, maybe even secretly.
And
so it's a tough thing because it's like back and forth.
No other races, no other people have any sort of means of retrieving a soul from the soul stone. It's only these Eldar.
I mean, the other people have figured out the soul stones, right? And so if somebody was so inclined to nab the Eldar soul, they absolutely can. It's just one of those things where, like, when the soul is kind of out there, unless you have a way to do something with that soul immediately, it's going to be really hard for it to not kind of just get snatched by Slaanesh. It's one of those things where, like, you have to definitely know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
But yes, so the important figure in the craft world, or the Asuryani kind of fleeing of the fall, was Asurman, the first Phoenix Lord and one of the biggest leaders in the Aeldari culture. We'll get to the other ones, but he was one of the big people that kind of pushed people into and helping them get into craft worlds and get them to safety once the fall, especially, was beginning to kind of really kick up, and kind of start funneling in and showing its signs.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll talk a little bit more about him and what and what he's up to now scenario. And yes, he is, as far as we know, relatively still around. But first I want to actually talk about quickly, I want to touch on the material that these craft worlds are made out of, because it's also the material that pretty much everything the Aeldari use is also made out of, which is called the wraith bone. It is essentially a special type of material that is really only utilized by especially the Craftworld Aeldari, and specifically the wraith or the bone singers of these Aeldari, where they're kind of able to almost like crystallize psychic energy and kind of turn it into this hard bone-like substance. That's hence the name, where they can start to kind of just form it into whatever. You know, you can kind of take this wraith bone and you can just completely expand and form it in whatever way you need to. And this is done generally by these bone singers because it takes a tremendous amount of psychic energy, and it's kind of something where it's kind of like your main thing. It's really, you can't really necessarily like push to become a bone singer and then like spend a lot of time trying to like becoming a warrior. Like if you become a bone singer, that is what you do. That is it.
I have an important question.
Yes.
This substance, this material, I'm assuming that you cannot actually like increase or decrease its mass in any way. Like you can take like what you have of it and it's malleable and it can be shaped and turned into different things, but it can't actually be like multiplied or duplicated in any way, right? Because that would just essentially allow for like infinite resources.
No, absolutely it can. It absolutely can allow for infinite resources.
So there's no scarcity then of this wraith bone.
No, this is why like this was such to the importance of like how advanced and like how far and why they were able to get so comfortable in Aeldari society before the fall.
Yeah.
Because they had no resource problem.
Wow.
They had infinite food. They had infinite ways to build, because it's literally just they're taking psychic energy and solidifying it. Mm-hmm. And psychic energy, especially from the warp, is infinite. And so from that, you have this capacity to essentially, it's all, the only limitation is the bone singer themselves, right? Their own abilities and how many there are, and because is the wear
it's a
and
Green
tear
Lantern
on the
type
person.
thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because like for example, you know, if you gave one craftsman, right, 1 million pounds of iron, you know, yes, they could technically build an iron sword forever, but that or blacksmith is gonna get tired. You know, they're gonna need to go to sleep. They got like, and they're one person. They're not gonna build. They're not gonna suddenly build a giant ship, or they're not gonna like by themselves.
Right.
With all of that iron, despite that they technically can. They're not gonna, because they're one person. So that's the limit, right? It's the person.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Will it weigh as much as 1 million pounds of feathers?
I don't know about the weight properties of Wraithbone. I know generally the whole thing about him is it's light.
It's already a little muddled because of the whole space aspect of everything, but
yeah, that no gravity.
Because it's like if you can create, not only can you sustainably have an infinite resource, but you can also make it so that it is like near like there is no difficulty in transporting it.
There's not really, like I said, I know that it's fairly lightweight, because a lot of things with the Eldar in general are light. Okay. They're a lot of their existence is about speed and like how nimble they are. Like dexterity is Like dexterity is their top stat.
Cool.
Like,
I like that. That's cool.
You know, and like, cause they're very classically, you know, space elves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yes, obviously, like, you know, when we get to like their large units, right? They're like knight and titan equivalents. Yeah, you're going to get, you know, they're going to be huge and they're going to be heavy. Like there is a mass to it.
Gotcha.
It's just I don't know the exact ratio. Like I can't think of like exactly the material they'd probably be like close to, because it's one of those things where it's like, you know, it's probably like light as a bone, but then it's tougher than a bone or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Like, because we're talking about, you know, this, you know, this non-existent thing, right? We don't have, you know, we don't have physically hardened psychic energy as a material in the real world.
I mean, you don't. Man, that's crazy. So yeah, near infinite resource, able to take it with them. I'm sure we'll cover this, but like I imagine that a bunch of other like races or factions would be like after that.
Man, it's amazing how far xenophobia can really put your level of disdain on someone.
It's already there, but then when you add money into the mix, yeah, it goes crazy.
Yeah, but like that's the thing, right? Is outside of rogue traders in the Imperium and maybe like just your outlier group of other races, right? Like maybe there might be an orc that might find something the Eldar have fancy and fun. You know, there's Trazyn, out of the Necrons, is probably the only one that actually care about collecting things from the Eldar. But then again, he's also just probably interested in collecting Eldar themselves, which we'll explain that when we get to Necrons. You know, but like the thing is, you know, all of these other races kind of have their own innate, you know, economies and resources. If anybody is potentially interested in the actual trade of the materials of the Eldar, it's the Votann. Because to them, that is proper trade.
Okay.
But even then again, they're probably the most interested in materials that they can actually work with. And they can't work with Wraithbone. They're not psychic. Especially not psychic enough, because you got to be pretty powerfully psychic. So yeah, it's kind of tough because it's like, it's one of those things where like xenophobia really kicks in hard, and when you completely ban the usage of Xenos weaponry in your army, like the Imperium does, then you're not going to have many people who are interested in it outside of those who are above those rules. So there's inherently two kind of known paths of especially the Asuryani, but the Eldar in general, which is to go through the path of the warrior or through the path of the outcast. And it's not uncommon for them to do both.
They get to do both?
Yes. The going through the path of the outcast is not totally looked at as like you are spitting on, you know, your ancestors or whatever, like stuff like that. Like it's a lot of time very much a lot of this does get dependent on the craft worlds too, right? There are probably plenty of families who would be disappointed in their child going into the path of the outcast, but some look at the path of the outcast as kind of like a coming of age thing. Like it's your time for you to go, you know, be wild, you know, allow your exhibitions to go. Mm-hmm. And then when you return, you will not only be wiser, but you will have knowledge of traveling the universe that you maybe didn't get in the craft world, or you wouldn't have. So it kind of shifts. But first, let's talk about the path of the warrior, because inevitably this is what, if you're playing Craftworld Aeldar, and when you see Craftworld Aeldar, this is what you're going to see the most, right? If you play Dawn of War, this is what you played. Stuff like that. Like these are the types of characters and whatnot. So
What's with the zebra stripes? I've noticed that on a couple of the Eldar here.
Yeah, so I mean the colors you'll see are going to always be based on whatever their craft worlds are. So right now, we're looking at an autarch, and an autarch is important because they are one of the main kind of warrior leaders in a craft world. And the big thing about them is that because while there are the two main Eldar paths, there is also the paths along like within the warrior path, right? And
okay.
So like there are multiple kind of trees of speciality when becoming an Eldar warrior, because there are they're kind of very generalist warrior, right? Like they're just your regular guardians, which are your kind of basic troop. But the big thing is that we'll get into is they're very well noted. The ones that like will stick out with you on Eldar is the aspect warriors. But the autarch is technically an aspect warrior, but it's one that has gone through multiple paths. Otherwise, next you will have we'll go to the warlocks next, which are elder psychers who have gone through their warrior paths, because inherently all Eldari have psychic capacity in them. They like every single one of them. These are the ones that specifically have now trained that portion of them, and now have been able to kind of bring that to a somewhat of a commanding level. So you'll find them that they're often looked at as potentially some type of seer. They might be kind of like a lesser one. Like they might, they kind of might end up being, kind of like advisors to the kind of like to autarchs. But they're the ones that you'll generally see doing a lot of like the offensive psychic stuff. They're going to be your offensive caster. Where then next, your Farseer, but Farseers are literally like the most potent leaders in an Eldari craft world. Like they're the ones that are going to be in charge of a whole, combat scheme. They're the ones who are going to be looked at the most for their guidance. So, and when I say that, they're leaders, like they're leaders in the truest sense of being a leader, where they lead, they don't control.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of where a thing that a lot of people kind of think with the Farseer is that like, they are, like, oh, these are the people who are in charge of the Eldar. They're not. They are, they very much can be. Like it's definitely not to be understated that they absolutely can be put in charge. But like they are, they don't specifically like take control of things unless like they're in a specific position where they need to, because their biggest things is their capacity to essentially see the past, present, and future. They always have some knowledge and understanding of what is to come, where your paths are heading, and therefore that is why they are looked at as leaders. Because of their foresight, they can help guide the Eldari, the Eldari people to their, to glory, whether what that may be, and obviously it's not perfect. They have been wrong. They have foreseen things incorrectly. They have been fooled. A great story of this is one of the kind of most prominent Farseers, Eldrad Uthran, once set up a meeting with the Primarch of the Emperor's Children, Fulgrim. He had witnessed that Fulgrim had passed a number of these planets and left them alone. And he didn't fully understand why. Fulgrim had gone to these planets and was so enamored by their beauty, and he was being corrupted by Slaanesh by this point. So Fulgrim's mind was kind of starting to get into this realm of like kind of being like led into disillusionment with the whole concept of like, let's get the Mechanicus here so they can rip everything out of this greenery and then shove a bunch of machines on top of it and create a thing of industry.
Yeah.
Hooray. So, you know, it had kind of been putting that in his head. So he had stopped. So for a few of these planets that he had seen this stuff, what he didn't realize is the thing that was enamoring him was Aeldari architecture.
Oh, yeah.
But Fulgrim wasn't aware of this. And so Eldrad had set up a meeting with Fulgrim, kind of be like, you seem to be different. You're not looking at these places and you're not destroying them. Why is that? So they are always kind of treating each other with a lot of wariness. And eventually when Fulgrim kind of gets insulted enough and he kind of brandishes his weapon, that's the only time that Eldrad all of a sudden sees, oh shit, he's got a Slanesh blade. He's been possessed. So yeah, he's got a lot of he has the ability to have a lot of foresight and see into the future, but it's not always clear. The future is a murky thing. And Farseers themselves are all kind of capable of that. Eldrad still around, by the way. Very, like I said, very prominent Eldar character and very prominent in not only the rising Ynnari that helped save Guilliman, but just also in general has kind of helped out and petered with a few things over the years in Warhammer. And is definitely a good character to kind of look into if you find yourself interested in the Eldar. But other than that, let's get into the aspect warriors. So there are a good number of aspect warriors. The aspect warriors inherently have, there's a number of aspects. I'll list them here. We're not going to go over them all.
Okay.
But to start, you've got the Dire Avengers, which were the first ones. They were the first ones. They're headed by Asserman. Then you have the Howling Banshees, headed by Jane Czar.
Love it.
Those who played Dawn of War will definitely recognize them very quickly. Striking Scorpions, headed by Karandros. The Dark Reapers, headed by Malgan Ra. The Fire Dragons, headed by Fuegan. Swooping Hawks, headed by Baharoth. The Warp Spiders, headed by no one of name right now. The Shining Spears, headed by Drastanta. The Crimson Hunters, headed by unknown. Eagle Pilots, headed by Ammon. Crystal Dragons, unknown. Slicing Orbs of Xandros, unknown. The Shadow Specters, headed by Irilith. And Ebon Talons by unknown.
These are all just high school basketball teams. I feel like you just named off like 20 high school 100%. Basketball teams.
Yeah, they have that naming scheme 100%. That feels like that. So the ones we're going to go over are I would say inevitably are going to be then your kind of like the most notable ones.
Please be Scorpions.
And like Scorpions. So the first we'll obviously start with the Dire Avengers. The Dire Avengers are, while they are an aspect warrior, what's funny is almost like it's kind of like their aspect is to be generalist.
Which fun.
Is like, well, yeah, it's kind of like, so what does that make you inherently? How does that technically make you any better than just
Ryu
a normal
from
Guardian?
Streets?
Yeah, it's like, how does this make you different from a Guardian? And the only inherent answer to that is just better trained. Okay. They're just more elite. They're just better trained. They're better equipped. And they are going to be more flexible than like a Guardian squad would be, right? They could switch from being in melee to range and still be just as proficient. That's the main thing. And yeah, they're led by Asserman, who's the first Phoenix Lord, who had led out led the Aeldari coming from that. I should get to that actually. What is a Phoenix Lord? Mask.
Yeah, we brought that up at the beginning, and then we just kind of kept on going.
Yeah, so the Phoenix Lords who head each of these aspect warriors, or in these aspects, are specifically, they are now set warriors. They have foregone the essentially concept that they would ever be an autarch, and are instead choosing that they will remain on this warrior's path there and are only to be freed from it in death or becoming an avatar of their god.
Oh, well, okay. There you go.
And then next up, we'll have our Howling Banshees.
Yeah.
Yes. And they, like I said, if you've played, you will know them. If you've played Dawn of War, especially the Dawn of War 3 trailer, shows them actually very clearly. These are your melee close combat specialists. They will have a pistol. So they have some range capacity, but
but you're also not shooting far away with a pistol. So yeah.
No, it's way more in just the sense of like, man, I just need to use this.
Yep.
But they will utilize more of like a Aeldari power, like an Aeldari made power weapon, rather than other melee weapons, especially generally these swords. So one of their biggest things as well is their Banshee masks. So for them, the helmets aren't just helmets. What they will do is that is to utilize their psychic powers to allow their screams to essentially be ear piercing. And then these helmets amplify that to such an extent it can burst eardrums in a moment.
Ooh.
It just leaving them completely incapacitated. They are led by Jane Czar. The Storm of Silence. She is she is a Howling Banshee epitomized. She's been around for thousands of years, and is a deadly force in and of herself. To see her on the battlefield, and not be on the same side as her is assuredly a death sentence.
She has a dark sector blade too. That's interesting. That's my obscure video game reference for this episode.
Yes, I
get one.
True. Everybody gets one. Let's talk about the warp spiders, which are super well known. Especially like if you watch the Dawn of War 2 trailer, they are your kind of, as their name implies, kind of warping. They have what's called the warp spider jump generator, which allows them to kind of fade in and out of the warp in almost a moment, essentially avoiding anything that is in real space and moving in and out. And this is obviously inherently very dangerous because they are using the warp, going in and out of the warp. They can very easily attract demons.
Right. Yeah.
So they obviously similarly then also will use stronger armor than a lot of the other aspects, much of this especially to help them defend themselves if they were to attract a demon. But then they also have kind of their own little, what's called a Geller field, which is what the Imperium uses on their ships when traveling through the warp, which is kind of like a warp shield. So like when the Imperium's traveling through the warp and their ship is in there for, a long time, there's, you can't just go through the warp and not be like demons being like, I'm going to hop in there and hang out and, maybe murder everyone on board. So the Geller field kind of works as a shield against that, and they have essentially their own miniature version of that in their armors. So this will kind of just help them out, but they otherwise, while they obviously are very heavily utilized heavily utilize their melee attacks, they also have really good short or just over short range kind of repeater blasters, which are very good at rapid firing into enemies nearby, so kind of softening them up as you get close. Especially if for like getting through their armor or through shields, those will help kind of reduce that. It's kind of like in Halo when you use the plasma gun to like eliminate an elite shield and then you punch them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. They don't have, they're missing their X-Arc one way or the other, whether or not they're dead, missing, don't have one, finding one, don't know. It's a mystery. Next is going to be the Shining Spears, who are led by Drastanta, and they're very much known for their hit and run tactics, but theirs are specifically because they're hit and run like the warp spiders, but they are specifically through their jet bikes.
Cool.
And one thing that is important to note and that differentiates them, because there are, their jet bikes themselves being used in the Aeldari as a whole, like as a race, incredibly prominent. Many of them do so in different ways, but the Shining Spears specifically utilize it with their laser lance. So they essentially not only can use these as powerful melee weapons, but essentially use these as large rifles. So a lot of times what you can inevitably see them doing is they can sometimes get up close, like if they're not doing it well enough, or as they come to pierce you, like essentially just shoot point blank and then impale and move on.
Mm-hmm.
So a very jousty, though themed. You can kind of tell by the way that their laser lances work or look, and they are very good at being anti-tank. Otherwise, next up is the Striking Scorpions.
Yeah,
they're
Scorpions.
going to be your other close combat aspect. So the thing is, the Howling Banshees are specifically a female-based kind of aspect. Now, this one is not just male, but they work differently. So you'll see that they'll often actually be wielding chain swords, much similar to many Imperial warriors, especially Space Marines and Sisters of Battle. But they will use other close combat ranged weaponry, like their pistols and their Manda blasters, which you can see on their helmet. They kind of look like these big cylinder worm-like things on the side of their helmet,
like mandibles, yeah.
But that's what they are. They're Manda blasters. Yep.
Whatever.
Yep. They are headed by Kurandras, which he doesn't have an updated model. Most of the Aspect Warriors don't have an updated model because GW just isn't a fan of the Eldar.
No, update it.
Though a lot of the Aspect Warrior models are probably older than you and I. They have a better general armor than also many of the other aspects, kind of sharing that with the Warp Spiders, because inevitably they are melee based, so they need to be able to get close. So by doing so, they are going to be armed so that they can reach you. I love the fact that they are an Eldar type that uses chain swords, because no matter how potentially illogical the chain swords and whatnot are, they're my favorite aesthetical thing in general in 40k. So I love non-Imperial things also getting them.
The thing
because
to understand,
have this Eldari design, but still chainsword.
The thing to understand about them is that they look cool, and that's all that matters.
Exactly.
They look cool.
Yes, rule of cool.
Your Honor,
rules.
The Scorpions look cool, therefore I love them.
Exactly. Next up, we have the Dark Reapers.
Oh my God.
They specifically set themselves to represent the Aeldari war god of Cain. especially in his aspect as a destroyer. So they use, while Kane, especially when he's avatared, is looked at often as a melee kind of induced warrior god, they will use heavy weaponry. Their standard weapon's called a Reaper launcher, and it essentially fires multiple small missiles at their enemies. Their Exarch, also known as Malgan Ra, is one of the most badass looking fucking characters. Fuck yes, it is.
Are you showing me a gun scythe right now?
I am absolutely showing you a gun scythe right now. He's fucking sick.
I didn't know I was meeting my favorite character today.
Dude, he's crazy. Awesome, and he's so fucking cool looking.
Skullomania, let's go.
And yeah, I mean, they're your heavy, heavy infantry for sure. They're about as close of an elite artillery mortar unit as you can get. Otherwise, next up, my favorite aspect in
that ain't Falco.
They are the swooping hawks. They are they use a anti-grav jump pack, which stylized as wings. So they're like metallic wings, which to me look sick. And because I like anything that has a bird aesthetic.
The helmets that we have been seeing. So like the whole time that we've been covering the Eldar here, like they have this very clear, like conical, like swoop shape to their helmet design. And it really specifically fits this here, like the Screaming Hawks.
Yeah, and like that's the thing is honestly like their Swooping Hawks name is kind of indicative of how they work, right? Like they very much kind of are coming in and out of combat, moving in and out of eye line on combat is common for all Aeldari. Okay. The Swooping Hawks do it specifically, they're kind of like, again, like a similarly medium range unit. They, I think, can be longer range too. They're not like the jumping units in the Drukhari, which are specifically really long range. But yeah, they're just kind of about moving up and down, dropping grenades, moving in to kind of sweep through a kill. Yeah. You're just flying up and down unit. And those are the aspect warriors that we're going to go through. Let's talk about kind of some of those things that can happen to you when you die. And there's two things a warrior can have done to them, much like an Imperial Space Marine. And that is, you can essentially have your soul put into a large walking unit.
Okay.
Yes.
Now we're zoning the enders.
Yes, one of them being the Wraith Lord, about just about the size, maybe just a little bit taller than a dreadnought of the Space Marines. They will have the soul. They will have the soul of a previous, especially maybe like wise or well known Eldar within them, because the Wraith Lords are generally the ones that'll have like the noble soul within them, and they'll often even be looked at for guidance by those who are maybe still living. So like if you were an Eldar hero, you'll go into a Wraith Lord. And, generally, like I said, like because they are often used for advice, much like, your Space Marine Dreadnought, they are a lot of times maybe going to be more tame, level-headed, maybe a little bit more peaceful in general. Otherwise, there is the Wraith Knight, the Knight-sized. Unlike a Imperial Knight, incredibly more dexterous. While the Knights can be a little bit more nimble than you think. Wraith Knights are incredibly dexterous. They can, move, duck, kind of do like a diving slide move in a melee attack. or they'll use like really large wraith cannons on kind of similarly on each end. They will have multiple souls, and they will have a living Eldar pilot within them as well. They will be piloted by Aeldari twins. The reason it's the twins is because the Ghost Warrior is driven by the two souls, one living and one dead, but they work together essentially as one being piloting this thing, but in the multiple ways. Again, this is one of those things where, like, do they just kill the twin? Probably.
Do we even want to know?
Do we want to know that answer?
Yeah.
I don't know if you do. And finally, before we get into the last kind of big unit of the Aeldari and the Asuryani specifically, I kind of want to briefly touch on the pantheon of the Eldar. See, the Eldar have a number of gods. I mean, that's obviously expected. But the most of them were killed one way or the other during the fall, right? Slaanesh came about and was like, "Oh, y'all created these gods. Guess who's the better god here?" And just like deleted them. A number survived or went dormant or fragmented. And the one of them, for example, that survived was Isha. But that is only because Isha was captured and is held prisoner currently by Nurgle. So deep in the garden of Nurgle is the Eldar god Isha, the goddess of the harvest. While there have definitely been attempts to go find her, not happening anytime soon.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, the other one that is supposedly one that was like had survived for a good period of time, and then was kind of fragmented in a way, was Cain, the god of war.
They just straight up have a god of war. Okay.
They will even conduct rituals to create an avatar of Cain. This, very knight-sized, creature version of themselves, where they're just the epitome of their warrior god. Just flaming, and will just cast flames and fire or cast flames and shed blood all across the battlefield.
Gotcha.
And this is done through a ritual wherein a number of Eldar will kind of circle up with their chosen, maybe Phoenix Lord or leading aspect warrior or whatnot, in the center, where in a very chaos-like, essentially conduct a ritual where they will, one way or the other, those around the circle will sacrifice themselves, pooling their souls into this one Eldar in the middle, who will then burst into flames into this avatar of Cain, which will, fight across the plains or the planescape or warplane, wherever they are.
But only for like a set amount of time, right? Like the Avatar of Cain, like once the Avatar of Cain has been summoned, it's not just there forever.
Man, it doesn't really say how long they will kind of result through. So next, and look, they have a number of like large vehicles, and they have really cool like jet-like vehicles, and they've got like this Avatar of Cain, they've got the Wraith Lord and Knights, which are awesome. They have their their bikes, their jet bikes. And then you've got these stupid walker things that they have. Like, I hate these things.
You hate them?
Because what is the point? Why does this slow walker have a windscreen, but yet this like ultra fast jet bike doesn't need one?
Aerodynamics. Aerodynamics,
Well, like,
Marshall.
But what aerodynamics? It doesn't even cover over to the top. All the aerodynamics is lost into the cockpit.
You know, Wraithbone aerodynamics.
Which are then exposed.
They have
from
infinite resources.
sides.
They have infinite resources to make the thing work how they want to.
And then it has these like two torso guns that just point down and to the side.
I was gonna say they point at like a 30-degree angle. Yeah.
What are they aiming at?
People below them that they're not just gonna step on with their giant feet.
But that's definitely enough talk about the Path of the Warrior. The Outcasts will utilize a number of things. The biggest thing being, though, that they must bear terrible burden of their heightened consciousness, which essentially just means, especially just by like being out in the world, by being out in the world, they are open to dangers. And one of these types that will be out in the world and in danger are the Aeldari Corsairs. Eldar pirates, y'all.
Ooh.
Hell yeah, brother. That's right. So they are outcasts who have essentially decided that they are going to make their living by raiding commerce and plunging the riches of the Milky Way galaxy. They're kind of your middle ground between the Aeldari and the Drukhari. The biggest thing, though, being that a lot of the Corsairs, will... And you will, because people and anybody can join Corsairs, whether or not they were originally Drukhari or Asuryani.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of those who will become Corsairs often don't return. Because inevitably, the pirate life for me, But by being out, they inevitably are some of the most in danger, but they also feel maybe that they are also the most free because they don't have the constricts of having to, follow the words of their craft world and whatnot. They can just kind of roam around.
Gotcha.
And so maybe in some way, maybe you could look at them as potentially maybe being where the Eldar, or where maybe kind of like the Eldar mind proper without having gone to its highest extremes in all circumstances. That little bit of degeneracy and robbing people, but not so much that they're going to full on just torture porn like the Drukhari do. Unless you have a Drukhari on your ship, but that's whatever they do, man. Hey, you know what? What they do with their own prisoner, that's their prisoner. They grab them. But you know what's cooler than raiding and riding through space on essentially a space pirate ship?
No.
Riding dinosaurs.
Oh, man. Okay. You called my bluff.
The Exodites of the Aeldari. These are Eldar who, during that period, when there were the Craftworld Aeldari, they were like, screw this, we're going out. There was another group of Eldar who were also like, screw this, we're leaving. But we're not even forsaking this degeneracy. We're forsaking much of our advancements. So we are going to go back to monkey. Which, funny enough, I'd make that joke, but they literally call humans Monkai, which looks a lot like monkey. And that's generally because in your game, you can't call your humans monkeys.
Probably not the best idea.
Correct. But Monkai lets you get away with it. But
they
return to Monk.
Sure.
They return to Monk, and if anything, really, they're just returning to like normal survivalist, lifestyles. And so not only then do they utilize things like these dinosaurs and whatnot in their combat and even just moving around instead of, say, like, a jet bike or, like a big speeder or whatever, they'll still use guns and other Wraithbone tech, just heavily limited. Like they set a cap to it, kind of like the Amish, the Amish that are maybe like slightly more liberal Amish, who like are kind of like, we'll use some technology, just not all of it. We got our principles still.
Yeah, of course.
But they still have access to the webway. So if they do need to leave and go places, they can. And GW needs to give them real army models because they'd be so cool. All right, we're finally leaving the Asuryani. And we're gonna talk about one of the gods of the Eldar and the servants of the Eldar, and the servants of that god, which is the god of tricksters and artists, Kegarok, and his harlequins. So Kegarok is pretty much the only was for a long time the only known surviving god of the Pantheon, keeping himself deep in the webway. You gotta, somewhat reminding yourself what the Eldar were before the fall, kind of being more like Drukhari as a whole. You gotta remember, this is the Eldar laughing god, so, it's gonna be like, oh no, we accidentally split this person in half. Whoops, haha, funny joke. So that's why the Harlequins will have a very kind of almost like demonic grin to them. And honestly, actually a big portion of that is their masks, and the Harlequins that serve Kegarok are putting on a play. And when they do battle, they're essentially putting on a constant play. The main function of the Harlequins is to protect a very secret, large library of information about chaos and the universe called the Black Library. Held deep within the webway, which is also the name of the company that writes all the books for Games Workshop. Makes sense, huh?
Okay.
And so they generally will not only protect that, but they will propose the will of Kegarok, which inevitably is supposedly all part of Kegarok's master plan to, like, I've seen a million ways to win the fight, but only one is the answer kind of thing. The Kegarok kind of has that, so he like uses his troops to kind of like muster where he feels like that'll eventually lead to Eldar success. All right, then finally, moving on from the Harlequins is the Aeldari. The Aeldari are incredibly important to current 40k. Led by Yvraine, the prophet and conduit of Yniad, the god of death. They are essentially, their goal is to bring Yniad back, to resurrect Yniad in full. And in doing so, they're going to help bring the Aeldari as a whole into a new age. And so in doing so, they somewhat act a lot like Harlequins in the sense that they will go and kind of perpetuate things that, again, are in this belief of what they're going to do. And in fact, are often helped by the Harlequins. And so they will be joined by not only Eldar, or Asuryani, but Drukhari as well. They're the mixed group. And actually in the game, if you play with them, you technically are playing them through the Aeldari Codex. But if your warlord is Yvraine, then she will allow you to bring in Drukhari as allied warriors into your Eldari army, so you can have both.
Oh, that's nice of her.
Which in the past edition led to some pretty broken armies. There are a lot of people who are a little upset with this function of the lore and the game because of that fact. but yes, so Yvraine was once she was once a Drukhari that had essentially been set up to lose in their Colosseum against Lilith Hesprax. But instead of dying, she was essentially called to by Uniad to be the prophet and to be your conduit, or their conduit. And she is very much lovingly followed by this lynx-esque creature, which absolutely plays the role essentially of like a dog in every story that they're in. They're best boy. And yeah, like, so, and she played a big role in the resurrection of Guilliman, in helping her and Eldrad work a lot together. She has brought a number of even Phoenix Lords into her fold. Jane Czar, in fact, actually does work with the Ynnari now, and is like part of the Ynnari. And kind of as the Ynnari will move forward, it will pretty much continually be with the Ynnari themselves. They have benefited, though, the Aeldari, though, in many ways. I mean, the fact, first of all, that there's a lot more alliance with the Imperium in the Eldar right now because of the Ynnari. There's kind of like a bit of like a ceasefire, not a full truce. And obviously there's always your outliers and whatever, right? But just in general, like, it's not like an immediate shoot on sight anymore all the time.
Gotcha.
Which is an improvement from what it was.
Yeah.
So you'll see in the back of this, they will now similarly summon an avatar of Yniad, much like they do with Cain. The thing about Yvraine, how we were talking about the memes and stuff like that?
Yes.
Well, much like an anime, right? There's not many shit memes in 40k.
Oh, boy.
Right? But of course, you have a Ynnari assist a Primarch, and then assist a Primarch in mission sometimes. And an Eldar, who was once a Drukhari, which are known to inevitably allow them to, which are inherently are well known to let their pleasures go, and just act upon them at their whim, have obviously led to a lot of that. And even GW has played with this themselves a little bit.
That's pretty good.
But yes, the concept of the Guilliman X Yvraine thing is a thing, and you'll hear about it, and you'll see art and a lot of memes. Game wise, I will note the Aeldari in 10th edition, they've been very strong. A lot of this has been because of their fate dice. Essentially, the concept of their being able to somewhat have all of them having a bit of foresight, and then giving them an extra pool of dice to roll and replace. However, that's been balanced out a lot more now, and so they're still pretty strong, but they're not overbearingly powerful anymore.
Gotcha.
And they generally, are like kind of like I've talked about with the Aspect Warriors. They move in, they move quick, they get into cover, in and out, they pop in and out of cover all the time, and that's their way of play. If you like that fast play style, then you'll like playing the Eldar.
Cool.
Other than that, that's about it. Next will be the Drukhari. We'll hit that other side of the coin, and we'll end up talking a little bit more about the Ynnari and the Harlequins a couple of times. But any questions about the Aeldari before we go?
Nah, that was extremely thorough. And I like, I'm really keen on that whenever it's like, here's this group of people or this faction of people, and then they have all these different like aspects or like subsets of themselves that are all like unique. I liked it with the Space Marines in general, like just the sheer number of different like types and various ones. So I like that with this too, just like having all these different aspects was really neat.
No, I love the Aspect Warriors are definitely like one of the most attracting things for the Eldar, especially from a lore standpoint.
Do you have a favorite aspect?
My favorite aspect is the swooping hawks. I mean, they're
Yeah.
they're like birds. I like bird aesthetic.
No, that's cool.
So
that's probably like number 2 for me.
yeah, what was your favorite?
Scorpions. I don't know what it is.
Well,
I just immediately, like, the second you showed me them, I was just like, yeah, these are the guys.
Well, and what's great about the striking scorpions is, especially like that number one way, you know, that like the number one way I actually think to start playing 40k is actually through their game mode called Kill Team.
Okay.
And they just got a Kill Team box, so you can get 10 striking scorpions. They're brand new sculpts. And
a
then
partridge.
So not only do you get, and so not only that you get essentially potentially 2 separate units for the full sized game when you want to switch to it, or 1 big unit, but you get a really cool sculpt for it too. Because like Kill Team is essentially like 1 10-man squad of each side fight each other. So it's like really. It's accessible, which is the nice part about it. But yeah, they're cool. So the Eldar. Screw you, Eldar haters. The elves aren't that boring. You just don't read the right things.
Wow, the call out.
Also, their lore isn't honestly a lot of Eldar, like Asayani books specifically, aren't very good. Gotcha. Which is a shame. But they have good in them. You just need to see it. And GW needs to do a better job. But other than that, that'll be it for this week. Drukhari next week.
All right.
See you later.
So long.